Marina Kukla here to discuss cognitive behavioral therapy for work success, CBTw, session 7, coping with anger and difficult emotions. So by this stage, we're firmly within sort of the more behaviorally oriented sessions of CBTw. We start heavily cognitively oriented. We introduce the 4 A's, and then we start to focus more on some of the behavioral components, including coping and other strategies that people can really sort of use and address as they think about and move towards their work goals and pursuits. So last week we presented this sort of toolkit of different coping skills: the breathing, the relaxation, thinking about pleasant activities, as well as some of those positive self-statements that can be used to address stress and anxiety and sort of related things, or just in general to help us regulate ourselves, especially in the work context. But obviously those skills could be used in other life contexts as well. Now today, session 7, we're building on that, and we're going to discuss coping with anger in particular. And so the agenda for this week: learn how anger and related emotions fit within the CBT model and impact behavior, think about positive and negative consequences of anger, and then our main didactic this week is applying the problem-solving model that we learned 2 weeks ago to anger in particular. So probably the first thing to know about this session is that not everyone will be able to relate to this experience of anger. We focus on it here because this is something that very commonly not only everyone can relate to, but in particular in this population, this could be something that has especially negative consequences as it relates to work. So not being able to manage one's anger and in the work environment or at work can result in job loss or just difficulty getting off the ground and working towards that job to begin with. That's why we really focus on it. Both of those considerations are why we focus on this. However, if you have people in your group who they say, yeah, that's not me, I don't get angry, and they're not willing to either connect with their experience of anger, or that's just simply not a major issue for them, that's why we say anger and related emotions here, because and other difficult emotions, because maybe there's other things that get in the way for them that they want to focus on. Maybe they get like really frustrated or irritable a lot. They're really annoyed by other people and being around people. Maybe they feel overwhelmed or really anxious a lot. Maybe they're depressed and they have that experience of being forlorn or sad, and that's what they want to focus on. There could be lots of other things as well. So I don't want you to feel constrained by this, especially if you have a group that says, yeah, this isn't me. You can adjust and make that modification to focus on other related emotions as well. So if you are going the anger route, though, the first sort of piece of this is you deliver some education here on 62, and then you ask veterans in the group so to mark in their manuals where they fall on the anger scale on an average or typical day on a scale from 1 to 10, and then or 0 to 10, excuse me. If they wish to share that, they can. Then as a group, you would go over the positive consequences of anger. Of course, there are some that can energize and motivate behavior, and it can also let us know that something's wrong or maybe something is unsafe and we might need to act to keep ourselves safe and okay. And there may be others as well. So you would go through these and then invite veterans to share. Then you would review the negative consequences of anger, which are listed here. And there are many others as well that people might be able to identify. On the bottom of 63 then is more education regarding how this works, particularly in the employment or the work context, and how we can use anger to our advantage. There's a specific example here on 64, the situation: the boss gets on you. In this case, we're saying for working too slowly, but it could be any situation at work like this. You might feel angry or frustrated, thoughts: this is unfair, I don't deserve this. Possible behaviors: you snap back at the boss, you start coming in late to spite the boss, or thirdly, you work to improve time management. And so you can see, based on these examples, there can be a positive outcome of this, of feeling angry, or there can be obviously these negative outcomes that can jeopardize your position in that job. And if you want to keep that job and that's something you want to keep doing, then learning how to manage those emotions are going to come up. Another technique to use here is normalization. We all experience these things from time to time. We all have frustrating experiences at work or with a supervisor or someone we work with, and we have to figure out how to manage ourselves because we can't always control other people's behaviors. Of course, in most cases, we can't. However, we can control our behavior and how we react both cognitively and behaviorally to this. And so that's why we're focused on this. This is the underlying premise of this session, is that we can use these CBTW approaches um, to impact how we react. So then as a group, you would sit and think together. Can you think about your own examples when you experienced anger that impacted your actions? And so this is an open group discussion. Of course, people can jot notes down here if they wish, but this is where you sort of start to elicit those stories or those narratives about how anger and related emotions have impacted people, especially as it relates to what they want to do, or prior jobs that maybe didn't go so well. That oftentimes comes up here, or maybe non-work related examples too. You might start to notice particular patterns for particular veterans and how this has come up. For example, a veteran who oftentimes gets angry or dysregulated at work, and then they react to that by starting a conflict. It could be just a verbal conflict or even a physical conflict or altercation with someone at work. We can obviously see how that would lead to terrible consequences and outcomes for that individual, and that this may be a long-standing pattern. Or it could be that difficulty dealing with these difficult circumstances and the emotions that come along with them lead someone to quit jobs a lot, or just walk off the job and feel like, you know what, this isn't worth it, like our example up here. So this is a continuation of the example here on 65. Thoughts you might have in such a situation: I'm a total screw up. They're always going to try to get in my way. I hate working with these people. They're not worth my time. This job isn't worth my time. I don't know why I can't get a job. The interviews seem to go okay, but then I don't even get a call back. Why even try? What's the point? So all of these examples point to this idea that these experiences, and when we have trouble managing them and we're confused and we don't know what to do, it can really kill our motivation. So here's some more education that speaks to that point. And then we introduce the idea of anger can be thought as a problem to solve. And now we have a problem solving strategy or problem solving model or framework that we can use to directly address this. So here are our problem solving steps focused on anger, or it could be another emotion. If your group identifies something else that they would rather work on, or for each individual, it doesn't have to be anger. It could be something else. It's step back and identify the problem. This is really important in group when you're doing this together, and for veterans. We have to really nail and specify these first steps so that then the rest of the problem solving from there, the brainstorming, coming up with solutions, and laying out a plan can follow. So what's going on? What's the situation or the scenario? What are my thoughts in this situation? What are my emotions? Why am I angry? And am I interpreting the situation accurately? So we're doing a little bit of the 4A's in that we're doing some assessment here and identification, being aware. So some ways we interpret situations that prompt angry feelings: believing that you're treated unfairly or that things should be different. Rigid thinking, that's where our mistakes in thinking come into play. I'm right, they're wrong. Judging the situation as wrong or unfair. Ruminating about it, so thinking about it over and over again. Current or past events that set off anger. A lot of people, they may focus on something that happened 5 or 10 years ago, and they continue to just think over it over and over again. And it's really, they're kind of stuck on it. Okay. And then brainstorming. So ask yourself the following: how can I help myself to feel better regardless of the situation, using some of the skills that we've presented or other things they find helpful? How can I think differently? Again, that would be using our 4A's or those positive self statements. And then what actions can I take to solve the problem? So here are some examples, and you would go through this together and have veterans take turn reading, or you as the facilitator could read this content. So changing the way you're thinking about the situation or the person involved, stepping away from the situation, taking a breather or 5-minute walk. A lot of veterans and folks who've gone through CBTW really like that option. Focusing on something else, like distracting yourself with another task, engaging in a pleasant activity, talking to someone to vent appropriately, etc. So you would then do the brainstorming, you would rank the solutions, try it out, see if it works. If it doesn't, ask yourself, why not? Do I need to try or implement a different solution, or maybe a set of solutions? Maybe you want to try more than one. I think in this case, that might make some sense. And then shake it off if you can't solve it, because there, as I said, there are many situations that fall outside of our control. You can't fix everything, and ruminating may only harm us and not help us. So, and then you would go through, have them sit with their manuals and actually write their own examples. We also have an example in our fillable PDF of how this works. Again, the idea, if you go through it as a group first, is to show them how this works. Be very specific in step number 1 regarding what the situation is and what it is that you're actually trying to solve. What's the problem? What's the situation? What is this particular set of dilemmas that you're trying to solve with steps 2, 3, 4, and 5. Okay, so you can show that fillable PDF if you want, and then have veterans actually sit and write in their manuals on page 69 and 70. Hopefully you'll have time that they can go through their examples and that you can open that up to the floor. In terms of the techniques, so at this stage, we want to continue with our cognitive reflections using first person, saying it in their words as if it were a quote. So you could say something like, it sounds like what you're saying is, I get really angry when people piss me off at work, or I get really angry when I feel like people don't appreciate me, or they don't recognize my work for what it is. Or I get really frustrated when my boss forgets my name and I've worked here for a month. So use those first person, and remember to identify what they're experiencing as a thought when it is a thought. Several folks have trouble identifying what they have as thoughts. They might say a bunch of thoughts, but in their own mind, they're not identifying like, oh, I'm having a thought. The reason that we want to help them identify that as facilitators is because they can use our CBTW skills to answer those thoughts, assess them, and come up with something more helpful and healthy, okay? And we're also at the stage where using the basic behavioral reflections is appropriate as well. And so they're gonna, in this session in particular, they're going to identify many behavioral patterns that have tripped them up. And so just basically reflecting that. You've noticed that it's tough to get along with people at work, or you notice that you like to work alone, because when you don't, you get really frustrated. And there could be 100 other behavioral patterns. So continue to reflect the basic behaviors, behavioral patterns. Could be positive things like that when you take a walk, you've found that like that's pretty helpful, that you feel calmer after you take that walk. That's a basic behavior that you could reflect. So reflect those thoughts, reflect those behaviors, and continue forward. We're on a really good path here. The homework then is to actually utilize this problem solving again. If it's not anger and they're focused on some other experience or emotion, go ahead with that. You can make that modification as appropriate for the group or for the veterans that you're working with. Okay. And also ask them to figure out which strategies work best for them to reduce anger. I think this is the biggest key. This is something that trips people up. So having a set of strategies, trying new things, especially if they haven't come up with anything that works, and seeing what works and what doesn't, and continuing to try stuff until they find something is important. Okay, so that's all we have for session 7. Hope it goes well. Thanks for watching this video.